Nikola Tesla didn't scream. He wrote, quietly, precisely, like a man who had more to say than time would allow. His notebooks weren't filled with formulas for machines. They were letters to a world that kept turning its back. And perhaps the saddest part isn't that we ignored him when he was alive, but that even now, when his name is quoted, it's rarely his soul we remember. We remember the light, not the man who lived mostly in the dark. We quote the inventor, not the exile. But Tesla never wanted to be famous. He wanted to be heard. He believed in a future not built on profit, but possibility. A future where energy was free, where minds were liberated by invention, not enslaved by it. And yet, the more he gave, the more he was pushed aside. Too radical, too idealistic, too inconvenient. So he started writing in ways no one could interrupt. In symbols, in blueprints, in letters never mailed. And somewhere in those pages he warned us. Not in fear. In clarity. He saw what happens when technology outpaces empathy. When systems grow but souls shrink. He wrote of energy fields, of global connection, of frequencies that could heal or destroy. And the world labeled him a dreamer. But dreamers don't die forgotten, unless the dreams they carry terrify the ones in power. Tesla's greatest invention wasn't mechanical. It was visionary. And in a quiet hotel room with unpaid rent and flickering lights, he left behind not just ideas, but evidence that the future had already knocked. We just weren't ready to open the door. Tesla didn't live in the future. He lived in a present that felt too small for what he could see. Every time he spoke of wireless energy, of machines guided by invisible waves, of transmitting thought without sound, people smiled politely, then turned away. They didn't dismiss him because he was wrong, they dismissed him because he was right too soon. And rightness, when it arrives before the world is ready, feels like madness. So they called him eccentric, strange, obsessed. They wrote headlines about his pigeons and his loneliness but ignored the warnings wrapped in his theories. Tesla wasn't trying to conquer nature. He was trying to cooperate with it, to listen to what the earth was already saying through vibration, frequency, and resonance. But industry wanted control, not harmony. Profit, not purity. And so, while others patented and profited, Tesla faded, not because he had nothing left to give, but because he refused to turn truth into currency. In his silence he wrote. In his isolation he dreamed. And what he saw then, a world interconnected by invisible signals, communication without wires, knowledge shared without limits, is the world we live in now. We call it innovation. But he called it inevitable. He wasn't surprised by the future. He was waiting for it. And in every line he scribbled late at night, there was a quiet question embedded in his diagrams. Will they use this to connect or to control? That was the warning we ignored. And now, as we drown in the very signals he once foresaw, the answer is starting to emerge, not from the machines but from what we've forgotten to feel. They called him a genius, but they never treated him like one. Not when it mattered. Not when his pockets were empty and his dreams too vast to fit inside boardrooms. Genius for Tesla was a burden, not because of what he knew but because of what others refused to learn. He wasn't building machines. He was building bridges, between man and nature, between thought and energy, between what is and what could be. But bridges don't pay unless someone owns the land on both sides. And Tesla didn't believe in ownership. He believed in offering. He gave his ideas freely, not because he was naive, but because he understood something that terrified the world, that true progress demands surrender. Not of power but of ego. Not of ambition but of control. That's why they pushed him out. That's why his inventions were stolen, twisted, buried. Not because they failed, but because they couldn't be sold without first being silenced. So he withdrew. Not in defeat, but in refusal. He would not perform for the same hands that shook his and then closed behind his back. He chose solitude not because he hated the world, but because it broke his heart to see what it could be, and what it chose to become. And in that silence he wrote. Letters not for applause, but for memory. For the future. For anyone who might one day wonder what it means to see everything, to offer everything, and still be left alone in the dark, holding a truth too bright for the room. Long before Tesla built anything, he listened. As a child, he would stare at rivers and swear they were whispering something. He believed that every object, stone, tree, gust of wind, carried its own memory. Not metaphorically, literally. To him, the world wasn't mute. It vibrated, and he could hear it. While other boys played, he watched lightning. While others shouted, he listened to the hum of silence between thunder. He was different, not by choice but by composition. His mind never rested. Images, patterns, full machines would appear to him in flashes, so vivid he once thought he was going mad. But what others called madness, Tesla called language. He believed the universe spoke in frequency, in numbers, in invisible pulses. And he spent his life trying to translate that voice into something we could understand, into light, into energy, into future. But the cost of hearing what others cannot is loneliness. Teachers thought he was lying. Classmates thought he was strange. Even his family, though loving, feared the intensity of his mind. So he turned inward. And in that inward world he found clarity. He saw inventions before he had the tools to build them. He imagined futures no one had yet dared to name. And while others wrote essays, Tesla wrote visions, detailed, diagrammed, measured in emotion as much as math. That's what most people forget. His inventions weren't just technical. They were intimate. Not built for conquest, but for connection. Because he didn't want to rule the world. He wanted to tune into it, to harmonize with it, and in doing so be heard without having to shout. His earliest dreams weren't of glory but of light. Not the kind that blinds, the kind that reveals. He used to say that if you understand energy, you understand everything. But what he meant by energy wasn't just electricity. It was presence, feeling, memory in motion. And when he began experimenting with current, with coils and arcs, he wasn't just trying to power homes, he was trying to replicate what he felt when he stood under a sky full of stars. Wonder, wholeness, silence that vibrates with meaning. But as he grew, the world narrowed. He was told to be practical, to choose efficiency over elegance, profit over purity. And he tried. He went to school. He conformed, briefly. But his mind wouldn't sit still. Every formula was a metaphor. Every circuit, a conversation. And the institutions that first praised him began to fear him. Because Tesla didn't chase patents. He chased potential. He saw no reason why energy should be bought, why communication should be gated, why imagination should serve shareholders. His ideas threatened too many pockets. And the very men who shook his hand in admiration became his quiet enemies, not because he failed them, but because he outgrew them. That's when he started writing more than building. Because sometimes the pen outlasts the machine. In journals, in letters, he left maps of futures we're only beginning to recognize. He wasn't a magician. He wasn't even trying to be a genius. He was just someone who couldn't unsee what he had seen. And he hoped, quietly, that one day someone else might feel it too. Not in wires, in wonder. He once said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Most quoted it. Few lived it. Because to think that way means abandoning the illusion of control. It means listening instead of commanding. Tesla didn't want to master the world. He wanted to mirror it. And in doing so, he began to isolate, not because he rejected humanity, but because humanity rejected anything it couldn't own. He could feel when a room was wrong, when a storm was coming, when someone was lying not from their words but from their air. He lived in a state of sensitivity few can survive. And so, the older he got, the fewer people he allowed in. Not out of bitterness, out of protection. Because being that open in a closed world is a kind of violence. It tears at you softly daily. And still he kept offering, kept writing, kept sketching devices he knew would be stolen, misused, or shelved. Not because he expected recognition, but because he hoped, desperately, that someone in the future would pick them up with cleaner hands. That maybe one day someone would read his notes not with greed but with grace. And in those pages they wouldn't just see science, they'd see sorrow, hope. A vision of what the world could be if we stopped asking what we can take and started asking what we can tune into. He didn't die disappointed. He died unheard. And sometimes that's worse. Because a scream gets a reaction. But silence? Silence just disappears. Tesla believed that knowledge should be shared, not sold. That energy, The very force that runs through the stars in our bodies should be free, limitless, and untethered by profit. But that belief was dangerous. In a world built on ownership, Tesla became a threat not because he was wrong, but because he refused to make others rich. When he proposed the Wardenclyffe Tower, a structure meant to transmit energy wirelessly across the globe, financiers smiled at first, until they realized what he was truly building: freedom. The kind of freedom that cannot be taxed or owned. That's when the smiles disappeared. Funding was pulled. Rumors spread. The media, once fascinated, now mocked him. He became the eccentric, the mad genius, the man who talks to lightning. But the truth is, he never changed. The world just revealed what it truly valued. Not vision, not future, only control. And so, the man who once lit up the sky at Niagara Falls ended up surrounded by shadows. Not because his ideas stopped working, but because they worked too well. They threatened a system that thrives on limitation. And in that betrayal, Tesla didn't retaliate. He withdrew. Gracefully. Quietly. He kept writing. Kept dreaming. Because he believed that the truth, once born, cannot be unmade. It may sleep. It may be buried. But one day someone would dig it up and realize what we lost. Not just a machine, but a moment in history when we were offered a future and chose power instead. Among those who admired Tesla, many came wearing masks. Some offered partnerships, but only if he agreed to tame his dreams. Others praised him in public, yet privately stole his ideas, repackaging them into patents that history would later attribute to different names. Edison, Morgan, Westinghouse, each in their own way walked beside him but never truly with him. And Tesla, ever the idealist, believed too long in handshake promises. He thought that brilliance would shield him from betrayal, that purity of vision would win in the end. But the world isn't kind to the incorruptible. They get labeled naive, difficult, dangerous. And Tesla, unwilling to reduce his ideas into digestible pieces, became an outsider. He stopped attending banquets. He declined interviews. His notebooks became his conversations. His hotel room his lab. And yet, even in isolation, he never grew bitter. Just quieter. He still fed pigeons in the park. Still smiled at strangers. Still believed in a humanity that, despite everything, might one day return to itself. His final inventions were not machines. They were questions. Echoes. Diagrams of what could be if we built not for profit, but for resonance. The tragedy isn't just that he died alone. It's that we let it happen while calling ourselves his admirers. We honor his name, but do we honor his truth? Or do we still fear it, because deep down we know he wasn't building for us as we are, but for who we might have been if we had listened when he was still speaking? They eventually stopped writing about him. His name faded from headlines, replaced by newer inventors, louder voices, simpler stories. But Tesla never stopped writing. In journals, on scraps of paper, inside the margins of unpaid bills, he left traces. Pieces of thought too advanced for his time, yet too honest to be forgotten. He knew he would be erased. He predicted it. The present is theirs, he once said, but the future for which I really worked is mine. That wasn't arrogance. It was hope disguised as prophecy. And now, as we live in a world humming with wireless signals, electric pulses, global currents, we begin to hear him again. Not through celebration but through consequence. The world he saw is here. But the spirit in which he built it, that's what we left behind. We advanced, yes. But did we evolve? We connected every device but lost connection to meaning. Tesla didn't want a network, he wanted harmony. A civilization that listens as much as it builds. That pauses before it powers. And now, as we stand among machines he imagined, we must ask, did we inherit his brilliance or only his blueprints? Because the real legacy of Nikola Tesla isn't electricity. It's conscience. A letter written in silence. A warning wrapped in wonder. And if we still can't hear it, it's not because he whispered. It's because we've made the world too loud to feel what he was always trying to say. There is another way. But only if we choose to stop building machines that forget we are human. He died in a room no one visited. Not because he had nothing left to give, but because no one came to receive it. Nikola Tesla, the man who once electrified continents, took his last breath alone in a modest hotel suite, surrounded not by students or protégés, but by pigeons and paper. There were no reporters. No final applause. Just a thin body, worn by ideas that never had a home, and a silence deeper than science could ever measure. People like to believe that genius protects you from despair. That vision is enough. But what they forget is that a vision, no matter how beautiful, becomes a curse when it's consistently ignored. Tesla had ideas that could have changed the course of history. Some say they still can. But in the end, they gathered dust. Because those ideas demanded a shift we still resist. A world not ruled by profit, but by possibility. And that's what scared them. Not the coils, not the towers, but the freedom he envisioned. Freedom without a meter. Light without a bill. Connection without control. It was too much, so they let him go. Not suddenly but slowly, one by one. Handshakes turned into silence. Invitations stopped. His name faded, not from failure, but from the world's inability to see beyond its own reflection. Tesla didn't ask for monuments. He asked for meaning. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be received. And in the end, that's what was denied to him. Not recognition, but resonance. They said he became delusional, that he talked to birds, that he claimed to receive messages from other planets. But maybe the delusion wasn't his, maybe it was ours. A delusion that reason exists only in what can be measured. That wisdom ends where convention begins. Tesla never cared for convention. He believed the universe was alive, not metaphorically but literally. That every vibration carried memory. That light had intelligence. That thoughts could travel. And while science laughed, he kept listening. Not to them, but to the silence behind what they ignored. His pigeons? They were the only creatures that returned. That waited. That didn't ask him to explain. Maybe he saw in them what he never found in people. Presence without performance. In the final years of his life, he became a ghost that still breathed. Rooms grew quieter when he entered, not out of reverence, but discomfort. Because he reminded everyone of what they threw away, vision too honest to be marketable. In a city lit by inventions he birthed, he walked in anonymity. The irony never left him. And still he didn't complain. He folded napkins into diagrams. He whispered theories to his notebooks. He smiled at the sky as if it were the only one still listening. The world called him strange. And he agreed. But not because he was wrong. Because he was still waiting for a world that matched the purity of his questions. And maybe that's what broke him. Not loneliness itself, but the feeling that even his loneliness had become misunderstood. They found his body days after he died. A notice on the door. An unpaid bill. No eulogy. Just a quiet removal. And when they opened his room, they didn't just find a corpse. They found pages. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Notes scrawled with equations, metaphors, fragments of thought that still puzzle minds today. Some believe those pages held secrets. Others think they were madness. But maybe the truth is simpler. They were the last conversation of a man who had no one left to speak to. He wasn't writing for glory. He was documenting the ache of seeing too much too soon with no one willing to believe. And in those final words, you don't see ego. You see grief. A mind that once lit cities, flickering in solitude. His death didn't shock the world, it inconvenienced it. Another genius gone. Another obituary. Another quote for textbooks. But that's not what he wanted. He wanted someone to knock on his door before it was locked. Someone to say, "Tell me everything, even the parts one don't yet understand." That knock never came. And so he wrote. Until the world grew too loud to hear him. Until the silence swallowed the last spark of the man who once tried to give us light, and was left in the dark. We praise him now. But praise is easy when it's too late. And what remains isn't his name on statues or his face on currency. It's a question he never stopped asking. What if we had listened when it still could have mattered? Today we live inside the very world Tesla foresaw. Wireless signals move invisibly around us. Devices speak to each other through frequencies. Energy flows through silent infrastructures, and distance has all but disappeared. But in this world of instant connection, something feels eerily absent. soul. The vision Tesla left wasn't just about machines. It was about meaning. He didn't see technology as an end. He saw it as a bridge, a way to elevate consciousness, not distract it. But the world ignored the bridge. It stopped in the middle, built towers, and claimed it had arrived. Tesla's blueprints were never about speed. They were about depth, harmony, silence within motion. And now, surrounded by the very inventions he once imagined, we struggle to feel what he hoped we would: resonance. Because we kept the machinery and buried the message. We took the electricity but not the ethic. We connected devices but not hearts. And what remains of Tesla is more than legacy. It's a mirror. A reflection of a future we could have lived but chose not to. One where energy was a gift, not a weapon. Where thought moved freely without fear or filter. Where inventors didn't die in silence, but lived in gratitude. He warned us without rage. He left us a letter without blame. And now that letter sits open. Not in a museum, but inside this moment. Asking quietly, are you ready now to hear what I meant? Not with your mind. With your memory. With a part of you that still knows how to listen. Some say Tesla failed. That his ideas were too big, too strange, too soon. But maybe the failure wasn't his. Maybe the failure was ours, to imagine gently. To build bravely. To follow a man not because he promised power, but because he whispered peace. He didn't want to lead an empire. He wanted to awaken a generation. His vision wasn't built on dominance. It was composed like music, in waves, in rhythm, in balance. And now, standing in a digital age he predicted while dying by candlelight, we have to ask, what did we inherit, and what did we lose? We kept the tools. We discarded the tenderness. We copied the methods. We erased the motive. And now his notes read like riddles, not because they're complex, but because we've grown too impatient to sit with mystery. Tesla's genius was never in what he built. It was in what he believed, that the future could be compassionate, that knowledge could be sacred, that silence could teach more than sound. And in that belief he became something rare, not a machine, not a martyr, but a messenger. One whose message got lost beneath the noise, but not forever. Because some truths don't disappear, they wait. In paper, in memory, in sparks that feel oddly familiar. And when they return, they don't scream. They hum, softly. Like a frequency just low enough to miss, but strong enough to shift everything once you finally stop and listen. Maybe Tesla's final invention wasn't mechanical. It was emotional. A map made not of metal, but of meaning. A quiet resistance to the way the world forgets those who give without asking. He didn't write to be worshipped. He didn't design to be immortal. He dreamed because he couldn't help it. And in that dreaming, he left behind more than devices. He left a question etched into time itself. Can humanity receive a gift it doesn't yet understand? The answer still haunts us. Because even now we carry the signs. A sky filled with satellites. A planet aching under power. People more connected than ever, and lonelier than ever. This wasn't the future Tesla wanted. But it's still the one he warned about. And if there's any redemption, it's not in fixing the past. It's in finally hearing what the past tried to say. Not with pride. With humility. So maybe the next time you scroll through a glowing screen or send a signal across invisible air, pause. Not to marvel. To remember. The man who gave us light and died in the dark. The voice that whispered truth and was buried by applause. And if that memory stirs something quiet in you, something you can't explain, don't ignore it. That's not nostalgia. That's Tesla still speaking. Not through fame. Through frequency. And if you feel it, truly feel it, leave this video with one question alive in your silence. Are we finally ready to listen?